At work, there's two types of balls. Rubber balls bounce, glass balls shatter. And your job is to understand what you're holding at that moment in time. Like, there's so many things that we think something really terrible would happen if I didn't work over the weekend and get that thing shipped, or if I was to take PTO. The reality is they're all rubber balls. The family vacation that you decide that you're going to work on, I guarantee that for your family, that was a glass ball. Make sure that like the things that are the glass balls are the things that are going to get written on your tombstone at the end of your very long life.
We acknowledge the Gayamagal people, the traditional owners of the land on which we record this podcast. We pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. The best career advice won't come from an AI prompt. It comes from the people who've lived it. Welcome to Tech Careers Hotline, brought to you by the Tech Council of Australia. I'm your host, Adair Robbins, and this is a podcast for anybody who's curious about a career in tech. We put real questions from real people to the leaders and builders of tomorrow. Let's begin. Emma Crockett didn't set out to be a numbers person. She thought she'd become a vet until she went on work experience and had more fun setting up their IT systems instead. 20 years on, including 7 years at Meta, she's now VP of People Insights at Atlassian, a company that's changed the game on remote work. In this episode, Emma breaks down the data on what your first months in a new role actually look like, why the first 10 relationships matter more than you think, and one piece of advice about rubber balls and glass balls you won't forget. Emma, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Let's go back to the beginnings. Were you a maths kid growing up, or did this data-driven path come from somewhere else?
You know, it's funny. I definitely did not feel like a math kid growing up, but I think with the wonders of hindsight, I probably have always been a math kid. I grew up doing ballet. I was much more interested in being on the stage and in the theatre. I loved science.
Oh, wow.
I thought I was going to be a vet. And then I did work experience, and I actually had to do some hands-on vet. And I spent most of my time at the vet clinic actually setting up all of their IT equipment. And then I thought, maybe I'm not going to be a vet. And that is how I found my way into a STEM career. I went and got a IT degree instead.
Amazing. And were many people around you getting IT degrees at the time?
No. And I think that I was like one of 3 girls in my class, which like honestly I thought were great odds at that time for me. But no, I was one of the only people in my grade. There were a lot of people that went into business degrees and marketing degrees and even engineering degrees. So lots of people that wanted to be lawyers, lots of people that wanted to be a physiotherapist, not that many people who joined me in my IT elective.
Most people have never heard of people analytics as a career. How do you describe it when you meet somebody at, say, like a dinner party?
I will start with how I explain it to my kids, which is that I count people. Obviously, it doesn't stop at the counting. How I explain it to people at dinner parties is really trying to use data to kind of make better decisions around hiring, retention, culture, and how teams work. So attempting to make work better is how we like to think of ourselves. But I think at the end of the day, it's just a bunch of really nerdy mathematicians that instead of counting dollars, they really like to count people.
So going from studying IT to where you are now, you must have seen so much change over the industry and the role. What's that experience like?
I fell into this space basically straight out of university. It was a complete and total accident. I didn't think that I would be employable anywhere. And then, you get a job as one hopes to do, leaving university, and it fell into this space that I just have found so incredibly interesting. I would say there's a lot that's changed and a lot that hasn't. I think that the idea of creating metrics and measurement frameworks about how people experience work and how you might go about quantifying that, it hasn't changed that much. Our data collection mechanisms have gotten a lot more sophisticated. The thing that's probably changed the most is really how we manage the data and how we present the information to people. I think at the very beginning, it was very like, we want a seat at the table, HR kind of thing. And this was a way to kind of, we're as serious as finance because look, we have, stats and models that can back up what we're saying too.
Mm.
And I think largely that conversation has fallen by the wayside. I think depending on what your industry you're in, people generally understand the value that HR can bring to an organization at this point. And now it's really about driving as much business value and those desirable business outcomes that we're looking for. Um,
Mm.
so a lot's changed, but a lot stays the same.
Yeah, all the fundamentals. For
Yeah.
somebody who doesn't have as much knowledge around people analytics, what are some of the things that you're measuring? Like retention, like how long someone stays in the role or how quickly someone's promoted. But what are some of the other kind of metrics?
I'll take the retention side, even just identifying who might be a flight risk so that you can take actions to keep people before they might leave an organization. You understand what's driving that behavior. I think that's more interesting than just sort of counting, like this is how many people are leaving. The example that I think brings me the most satisfaction over the course of my career was actually making the case that we needed a much more robust internal mobility of tooling at a prior company that I worked at. It had been very informal and conversational. And the good news about that is that for those that were connected, you were able to move very freely around that organization. The downsides were if you didn't have those connections, you really didn't know what roles were available. And so you were quite limited in your movements. And even just proving with data, like what the constraints of that process was, and then having the satisfaction. I think the reason I like this job is like I still have a little Hermione Granger inside my head being like, you're right, this is the right thing to do. If you make it much more transparent and people can apply and, you've opened up your internal candidate pool, a lot more people were staying. They were more satisfied with their career and were having to do less external hiring for priority roles, which means that people onboarded faster. So I think to me, that's the example that's like the pinnacle of like, we helped the company, but we also helped individuals in the company with a real pain point that they were facing as well.
Was that at Meta where you were before?
That was at Meta.
I was there too, and I moved around a lot. So no doubt I benefited from those amazing processes. So thank you.
Yeah, of course.
So you were at Meta and you joined Atlassian less than 2 years ago, and you took on a pretty massive scope. What did that first 90 days look like when you were stepping into a role that big?
Yeah, it's a great question. I was pretty nervous about it because I'd been at Meta about 7.5 years. I had really established relationships with people across the business, and Meta was changing a lot, but I really knew how to navigate the organization in terms of how to get things done. And so I think my first 90 days really was shaped by trying to build some of that scaffolding for myself within a new company. So it was really a lot of listening to is sort of like, what are the current priorities? What is keeping you up at night? What's going well? What's not going well? What could I do to help? Trying to build those quick wins so people understood that they could trust you. And then really trying to remove friction. I mean, I'm just a big believer that work can be fun and it takes up so much of your day and you really don't have to spend it miserable. And so I think identifying the pieces that are at least within my control that help make people's day a little more fun, a little brighter, they're able to get things done a little quicker or with a little less friction. I think that's really what I looked for in those first 6 months.
How long do you think it really takes for someone to onboard into a role?
It's a great question. But I'm going to do all the caveats that a data person will give you, which is like, it depends on the role. It depends on the stage of your career that you're in. But I would say generally, the first 3 months, you really should just be focused on understanding as much as you can. Just know that you're not going to know which way is up. And your job is just to try and make as much sense as you can out of all of the information sources that you have available to you, whether that's data and people or whatever combination it is in, specific to your role. At 3 to 6 months, things should start to click. After 6 months, you should feel like you can start to do your job effectively without second guessing every decision that you make. But I think I think the thing that I see in the data is people second guess themselves so much through that first 6 months instead of just sort of like submitting to the process that this is all new and you have to learn it and there's no kind of way around it. You just have to go through it. After about 6 to 9 months, you should start to feel like you have a good sense of what's going on.
Wow. And that's so much longer than I think people anticipate or expect. And I know from
Yeah.
having joined tech companies, you look around and it seems like everyone knows what they're talking about and everyone's so impressive and it can be really overwhelming. And knowing that it's
I know.
probably going to be like 6 to 9 months until you actually are really onboarded into your role is kind of a relief.
Yeah. I think it's like a part of being adult that at some point you look around and you go, oh, wow. So no one knows what they're doing right now. Everyone's just making it up the best they can. And it's like, yeah, that's okay. Just get all the information you can and then make it up the best you can.
Yeah, I love that. You spoke about when you left Maddie, when you come into Atlassian, you didn't have the same relationships that you have. Do you see anything in the data that people who have broad networks tend to do better? Or is there anything about that relationship across the organization?
Yeah, again, it's like all the data caveats, right? Which is like it depends on your role and where you are in your career.
Yep.
I apologize. It's an occupational hazard that I have to preface everything that I say. But generally, yes, like we encourage people at Atlassian to build their network as sort of at least 10 people as quickly as possible and then to keep kind of building it from there. But those first 10 people, it's kind of like back in the day, not to keep talking about Meta, but like Facebook had like you needed 7 friends before you were retained. They sort of built their whole strategy on that in the early days. It's not dissimilar to how you onboard to a company. So the quicker you can develop that network relationship, everyone's network is going to look different. You know, some people work really deeply with the same set of people. Some people are going to have much broader networks, but understanding what your network needs to look like and building it as quickly as possible definitely expedites the onboarding process.
Wow, that's so interesting. How do you come to the number 10? Is just random or it's the average?
There was a study that was done and there was a scientific grounding in the number 10. I'd be curious to see if it still holds today, but there was research that was done and they landed on the number 10.
Amazing. Okay. I want to come back to that number in a second, but I want to talk about like Atlassian has been all in on remote work for years and you're the person who is analyzing whether that's working. What plays out in the data that surprises most people?
I think it surprises people that it matters how you work with them, not where you work with them. You know, we have stats that have confirmed that our hypothesis rings true. You know, there's no evidence of decreased productivity as a result of distributed working. Employees are still just as active on Slack and Confluence and they're collaborating in the same ways. Also, it's a really strong point of pride for employees. It comes up really consistently in our engagement survey. You know, 92% of Atlassians say that it allows them to do their best work. 91% say it's an important reason they stay. So we have these signals that say like this is working, but we had to work hard at it as well. It didn't sort of just magically work. It definitely helps that we build work collaboration products everyone is using consistently and in the same ways. We also have findings that say that it's really important that people still get together at moments that matter. So we also have things like, we call them ITGs, which other companies might call offsites, but is really just a word that you use to signify that everyone's going to travel to the same location and work together for a couple of days. Even when I worked at Meta, there were days when there was no one in a conference room with me on my calls. They might have even been in the same location, but they were in a different building and it would have taken too long to bike from one building to the next. So it's interesting that we have these kind of highly distributed ways of working, whether we're in the same physical office or not. Obviously, time zones add a little bit more complexity to that. But I think our findings are like very consistent with sort of what's intuitive, which is like it really matters that people are all working together the same way, less so that they're all in the same building.
Do you think that rule of 10, like building your network, still holds in a remote world? Or do you think it has to be broader or do you think it's spot on?
What I would say in my own personal experience, relationships become even more important because relationships are how you surmount the distance. Knowing a person and how they phrase things and what is a priority to them answers like 9 out of 10 of the like, why did they say this to me? Sort of questions that might come your way. The 10 probably goes up is my hunch, but I would be
Mm.
curious to do the research and find out for sure.
I love that stat, like building your 10 when you onboard into a new role. I think that's a really great takeaway for people. Let's talk about AI in HR. So a lot of people in HR, they're feeling nervous about where AI is headed. And you've talked about
Yeah.
it as a merging of technology and human experience rather than a threat. What does that actually look like in practice?
I love this question. It's my favorite thing that I'm working on right now. I'll answer the question super close to home, which is how are we integrating AI into how our team gets work done as a
Hmm.
people analytics function? Um, and we're still really early in the journey, obviously, as most companies are. But there's two things that I've really enjoyed about it. One is if you give AI enough context, it actually does a pretty reasonable job, at least as a first pass. I can't put my hand on my heart and say I actually feel really comfortable that I would ship it without, human.
Yeah.
But as a first draft, as an alternative to a blank page, I think we're finding a ton of utility in it. Where I'm finding the most fun actually is in having the entire team use it the same way. We have RovoDev in Atlassian, which is our sort of coding AI agent. We have built shared knowledge, for all of the data scientists across Atlassian, for the people analytics team, and then we have our own personal sort of context and letting RovoDev roam free in amongst that context with the things that need to get done day to day. Going back to my first point where I just really believe that work should be fun. It's taking a lot of the repetitive tasks and the repetitive asks that we get out of our day to day. And so it's also a lot of fun to just explore and kind of fail together. There's not like a magic map that everyone can point to and say this is exactly what will bring you value with AI. And so learning as a group what is working for someone and what didn't work for someone else, and then how multiple people within the team can take that and get economies of scale. It feels a lot more human when you're working through how to incorporate AI with other humans. It feels like
Mm.
you're working as a team and not just with a technology.
So let's move on to career advice. So your field sits
Okay.
right at the intersection of HR and data. Do you think that you need to be a numbers person to succeed in it?
What even is a numbers person, I guess, is the question that I would ask back. I think what you need is a really deep sense of curiosity. I think you need to be interested in the art of storytelling. Um,
Hmm.
and then I think you need really good business acumen. And I think you need that in equal measure as you do technical skills. I say all that because I don't know that that's the stereotypical view of what a numbers person might be. And you're at the intersection of human psychology and then putting numbers to sort of behaviors and outcomes that result from human psychology. There's no such thing as solving it. I mean, we are just endlessly interesting and fascinating people in the ways that we like to create and solve challenges in the
Hmm.
workplace. And so it very much feels like a sort of a Godfather topic where it's like every time I think I'm out, they pull me back in sort of thing.
Talk about those two skills. You spoke about storytelling with data and business
Yeah.
acumen. Why do you think they're so important in this role?
Because I think at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is influence other human beings to take a course of action other than the one that they would have taken left to their own devices. And so to convince people to do something differently, you need to tell a compelling story because people really react to stories. What is happening? Why should I care? How would I do this differently? Business acumen, because no two people relate to the data in the same way. It may be numbers, but there are events and circumstances and context behind that numbers that causes people to have a reaction to that number that is not just like, that is the number four. Sometimes like, well, it's four, but here are all the other things. And so understanding how to navigate all of those different contexts, to understand them, to build them into the story so people feel brought along instead of alienated from the data that you're putting together, is just a non-trivial part of the job. It's a huge part of what we do. Otherwise, what we find is that we put numbers in front of people and nothing happens. Nothing changes. And so telling that story, meeting people where they are, making it really tangible what they can do differently, making that feel possible instead of impossible, is probably where I derive the most joy at work as well.
Great. And you've hired a lot of people over your career. What's something that a candidate does that gets your attention in a good way?
To me, the thing that really sets people apart is sometimes they just really want this. They're going to make more out of it than the job has on its surface. There are people for whom this is just a job, and there are people for whom this is an opportunity to do more than just a job. And gosh, it's fun to work with the people for whom it's more than just a job, because you know that they're going to give you more than you expected at every moment. And by that, I don't mean that they're going to like put in more hours or work harder, but they're going to bring a sense of like ingenuity to it, where it's like, it's not the surface level problem that they've been presented with. They're deeply curious and they want to solve the core problem underneath it. And so I think the number one piece of advice that I would give to people is like, really want the job, know what you want to do with it, be able to articulate, like, if I was given this job, here is what I personally would want to achieve. Like, it's much like dating, where it's like, if you're able to articulate that, there's going to be people out there that like, that's what they're looking for too. And there's going to be people out of there that are like, nope, I'm looking for something different. And at that point, like, it's kind of out of your hands. You need the two parties to come together and want the same thing. And when that happens, magic can happen and it's beautiful.
Love it. Conversely, when, you're interviewing someone, and I bet it's really interesting too, being in a remote environment where you're interviewing people, what are the things that don't land?
I think it's the other side of the same coin, right? What's interesting about it? Not really sure. A very rote answer that like AI probably wrote for them. There's no deeper passion for any part of the job. In an ideal world, most people would be in a situation where it's the absolute job for them at that moment in time.
All right, we're going to finish up with a couple of questions, and this is Tech Careers Hotline. So we've got a question submitted from one of our listeners.
Hi, my name is Summer Hughes. I'm a TOI alumni from Rutherford Technology High School, and my question for Emma is, if you could give yourself or your teenage self one bit of career advice, knowing everything you do now, what would it be? Thank you.
Advice I got really early in my career, and I didn't quite get it at the time, but gosh, it's good advice, and I give it to everyone else that doesn't ask as well. And that advice is, at work, there's two types of balls. There's rubber balls and there's glass balls. Rubber balls bounce, glass balls shatter. And your job is to understand what you're holding at that moment in time. And it totally went over my head the first time I got given that advice. But gosh, it's true. Like, there's so many things that we think something really terrible would happen if I didn't work over the weekend and get that thing shipped, or if I was to take PTO and take an extra week to deliver something. And the reality is they're all rubber balls. Like, most of the time they're rubber balls. And you see it when people leave an organization too, that you're like, oh my gosh, how are we going to survive without that person? And then somehow the work goes on. I think for the most part, organizations are sort of self-sustaining systems. And so you have these rubber balls that end up bouncing. And maybe it bounces for a while before it gets picked up again, but it doesn't break. Things go on. Life goes on. And then there's some situations where like, this is a glass ball. And, it's a really pivotal moment in time. And they happen a lot more rarely than people think. And I think it's sometimes easier to relate them to people for things happening in their personal life versus things happening inside a company. The family vacation that you decide that you're going to work on, I guarantee that was like, for the work, it was a rubber ball, and for your family, that was a glass ball. And they would have much rather had your full time and attention. It's just a helpful exercise once a quarter, whatever your tolerance is for self-reflection. to kind of take a step back and be like, is this a glass ball or a rubber ball? And am I wise enough to know the difference right now? Or am I too close to this? Do I need to go talk to some people? Make sure that like the things that are the glass balls are like the things that are going to get written on your tombstone at the end of your very long life.
Great advice. Love that one. All right, Emma. So 10 years in the future, what do you think future Emma will be thinking about or working on?
Okay, well, my hope for future Emma is that she's retired somewhere because AI is now doing all the work for all of us. I'm not convinced yet that I'm going to get that lucky, but a girl can dream. I hope we're still focusing on problems that matter for people and we're making them better, one step at a time. I'm very much of the philosophy of like sort of do the next right thing. And it's really trite, but I kind of hope we're just making things that next one step better than they are today.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Emma. I really appreciate talking to you. And I loved hearing about the work that you're doing, how the roles evolved over the years, and those really interesting data points about how people work and how people feel at work. So thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Super happy to be here. And hopefully I just recruited the next generation of people analytics talent.
I'm sure you did. Thanks, Emma. Take care.
All right, thank you.
We hope you enjoyed that episode of Tech Careers Hotline today. And if you did, please help us out by subscribing, leaving us a review, or even share it with someone who you think might find value from it today. Until next time.